It was one of those nights where the air felt heavy, like you were breathing through a damp cloth. The kind of night where every sound carried farther than it should. Crickets chirped but then fell silent, as if even they sensed something was wrong. I had just finished closing up the diner on the edge of a quiet highway in northern Ohio, the kind of place truckers stop at on long hauls and teenagers sneak into after midnight. I'd been working there for years, but this night felt different, grim, still, the kind of stillness that makes your neck hairs stand up for no reason. It was after 2 in the morning when I finally walked out, my apron stuffed into my backpack, keys in my hand. My car sat in the far corner of the cracked parking lot, under a flickering streetlight. The other waitress, Jen, had left an hour before me, and our cook, Charlie, was still inside, finishing up. I should have asked him to walk me out, but I didn't. I'd parked under the light for safety, thinking it would help me feel less alone. It didn't. Halfway to my car, I noticed something odd. Across the highway, behind the tree line, a faint orange glow pulsed like a weak fire. I stopped. It didn't move or flicker like a flame. It was steady, rhythmic, a light turning on and off. There wasn't anything out there but forest, old trails, and a collapsed barn from the 1940s. No homes, no people. I tried to shake it off, but my skin prickled like static electricity. I got into my car and started the engine, but something felt off. The diner's lot was empty except for me. Yet in my rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement, a shadow darting between the few cars parked along the edge. I turned around. Nothing. Just the silent, cracked pavement and the flickering light. Pulling out onto the road, I tried to focus on the hum of my tires against the asphalt. It was only a 15-minute drive home through winding back roads, but with every turn I felt more and more like I wasn't alone. The orange light from the woods seemed to follow me somehow, like it was trailing through the trees just beyond sight. 3 miles in, I passed an old gas station that had been shut down since the 90s. Its windows were boarded up, its sign rusted. Out front stood a single payphone, its receiver dangling like a dead limb. As my headlights swept over it, I saw someone standing next to the phone. Tall, thin, motionless. The beam of my headlights hit his face for just a second, but it didn't look like a face. It was pale, too pale, and the features didn't sit right, like they'd been drawn by someone who'd never seen a human. His head turned slowly toward me as I passed, but his body didn't move. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed on the gas. My heart was hammering now. I told myself I was overtired, that it was just a trick of the light, but deep down I knew better. When I glanced in the mirror again, the man was gone. Then, about a mile further, my radio turned on by itself. I hadn't touched it. I never even used it. Static filled the car, soft at first and then louder, like a swarm of insects crawling through the speakers. I tried to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. The static shifted into a faint, hollow voice. It whispered something I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakable. It was calling my name. I slammed my palm against the dashboard. "Stop!" I yelled, but the voice only got clearer, stretching my name out in a low, guttural drawl. Arna. My blood went cold. Nobody calls me Arna except my late grandmother, and even she hadn't said it like that. Suddenly, the car shuddered, like I'd hit something. My headlights flickered. I slammed the brakes and skidded to a stop in the middle of the road. The forest pressed in from both sides, thick and black, the branches reaching out like claws. My engine idled, but the air inside the car had gone cold, freezing cold, like winter had blown in through the vents. I looked up, and there he was, the man from the payphone, standing in the middle of the road about 20 feet ahead, not moving. His arms hung at his sides, but his head tilted at an unnatural angle, almost touching his shoulder. My headlights caught his eyes. They weren't eyes. They were two black pits, empty and endless. I jammed the car into reverse and hit the gas. My tires squealed against the pavement. The man didn't move, didn't even blink. I drove backward for what felt like forever before finally spinning around and tearing off down another road, no idea where it led. The static in my radio cut off. Silence fell. But it wasn't a comforting silence. It was the kind of silence you get in a church after everyone's gone home, when you're not sure if you're really alone. I kept driving, my hands trembling, until I saw a faint light ahead. A farmhouse. Old, but with one porch light on. I pulled in, desperate for some sign of life. As soon as my tires crunched on the gravel, the porch light flickered and went out. The front door creaked open, just a few inches. No one stepped out. No one spoke. I rolled my window down a little and called out, "Hello? I'm lost." My voice echoed back at me, flat and lifeless. The wind shifted, and I smelled it then. Rot. Wet, heavy rot, like something dead had been sitting in the sun. The door opened wider. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas and tore back down the driveway, gravel spitting against my car. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure standing on the porch now. The same man, or the same thing. Still watching me. When I finally reached the highway, my gas gauge was nearly empty. I pulled into a brightly lit truck stop, parked under a floodlight, and locked my doors. My whole body was shaking. I sat there for what must have been an hour before I dared to look around. That's when I saw the payphone. Right there, in the corner of the truck stop lot, was a payphone exactly like the one at the abandoned gas station. Same color, same dangling receiver, and standing next to it was the man. His head tilted, his black pits for eyes staring straight at me. I blinked. He was gone. The next morning, when the sun finally rose, I checked my car. Deep gouges ran across the trunk as though something with claws had dragged itself along the metal. My radio was dead, completely fried. The payphone at the truck stop? It wasn't there. There was no corner, no booth, no receiver. I haven't driven at night since. I don't take the back roads. I keep my phone charged and my car full of gas. But sometimes, when the air gets heavy and the crickets fall silent, I swear I hear static. Faint at first, then louder, and a voice whispering my name. I know it's still out there, waiting, watching, patient. Story the end. The wind had died hours ago, leaving the town in a suffocating stillness. Out here in rural Pennsylvania, nights like this felt endless, thick, heavy, and wrong. I was staying in an old house on the edge of town, a rental I'd found online while looking for a cheaper place after my divorce. The listing had promised peace and quiet and historic charm, and at first it seemed perfect. A 2-story Victorian with peeling white paint, warped wooden floors, and a wraparound porch that overlooked a field of tall grass. The locals had warned me about the area, but not in any direct way, just subtle hints, questions like, "You're really staying there?" or "You know about the property, right?" followed by uneasy glances. I'd brushed it off as small-town superstition. After all, I'd lived in cities my whole life. What could possibly be so bad about an old house in the countryside? The first few nights were uneventful. The silence was almost soothing. No cars, no sirens, just crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. But on the fourth night, the quiet started to feel different. Not peaceful, but hollow, like the world had turned itself inside out. That night I woke up at exactly 3:03 a.m. My eyes shot open as though something had yanked me from a dream, but I couldn't remember what it was. The house was silent. Not just quiet, silent. The crickets, the owls, even the wind had stopped. It felt like the air itself had gone dead. I lay there staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. Then I heard it, a sound from downstairs, soft, wet, like bare feet moving slowly across the kitchen floor. I told myself it was the pipes, the old house settling, a rat maybe, but the sound continued, steady and deliberate, slap, drag, like someone walking with one foot bare and the other dragging. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand. My phone showed no service, which was unusual, but not unheard of in this area. Slowly, I crept down the staircase, each step groaning under my weight. The sound stopped the second my foot hit the bottom step. The kitchen was empty. I swung the flashlight around, its weak beam cutting through the dark. The linoleum floor glistened faintly, and at first I thought it was water, but when I crouched down, the smell hit me. Iron. Metallic. Blood. There were faint, wet footprints leading from the back door to the middle of the kitchen. Bare human footprints, one normal, the other smudged and dragged, as though the person was limping. The footprints stopped in the middle of the room, like whoever had made them had simply vanished. I backed up slowly, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The back door was locked from the inside, the windows too. I checked every latch twice. There was no way anyone had gotten in or out. I stayed awake the rest of the night with the flashlight on, sitting on the couch with my back to the wall. At dawn, the footprints were gone. Completely. The linoleum was dry, clean, as though nothing had happened. I tried to convince myself it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been. The next night, I went to bed earlier, leaving a lamp on in the hallway. Around 3 a.m., I woke again. This time, the sound was louder. Slap, drag, coming from upstairs. My heart raced. I was upstairs. I sat up, straining to hear. The sound was right outside my bedroom door now, slow and deliberate. Slap, drag, slap. I grabbed my phone. Still no service. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I swung it toward the door. The handle turned slightly, just a soft creak, and then stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The sound stopped. Minutes passed, or hours, I don't know. Eventually, dawn came, pale light spilling into the room. The house was silent again, but not empty. Never empty. I decided to leave. I packed my things, shoved them into my car, and drove to the nearest motel. But when I opened my suitcase that night, I found footprints on my clothes. Small, wet, bare footprints, one normal, the other smeared as though dragged. The following days blurred together. No matter where I went, the sound followed. Slap, drag, slap, drag. I'd hear it in motel hallways, in gas station bathrooms, even outside my car when I pulled over to rest. I started researching the house. The property had a history. It had been a stopover for travelers back in the 1800s. People disappeared there. Stories of a limping man, a caretaker who had murdered those who stayed without paying their rent. He'd been killed by a mob, beaten to death, his body left to rot in the kitchen where his victim's blood had pooled. The townsfolk called him the Dragging Man. Some said he never left. I thought moving would help. I rented a small apartment in another town, paid cash, didn't tell anyone where I was going. But on my first night there, at exactly 3:03 a.m., I woke to silence. Then came the sound. Slap, drag, slap, drag. This time it was in the hallway, my hallway, coming closer. I sat frozen, clutching my phone with its useless no-service notification glowing faintly. The door handle to my bedroom rattled, then stopped. A text buzzed on my phone, an unknown number. Too late. The dragging sounds stopped. The silence returned, but it was heavy, suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. I don't sleep anymore. I don't even try. No matter where I go, the sound finds me. The limp, the wet footprints, the metallic smell. It's not the house, it's me now. The last text came this morning at 3:03 a.m. while I was sitting in my car in a Walmart parking lot. I'm here. And when I looked up into the rearview mirror, there was a shape in the back seat, pale, eyes like holes, one foot bare, the other dragging. Story the end. The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring because it's so complete. I had been driving across rural Pennsylvania, heading back to my aunt's farmhouse after visiting friends in a neighboring town. The road was narrow and unlit, framed by tall trees that leaned in like dark sentinels. It was early November, and a cold mist clung to the ground, twisting around the wheels of my car as I moved. My phone had no signal. The radio had turned to static. There wasn't another car in sight. I'd taken this road countless times, but that night it felt different. I remember thinking how strange it was that the trees seemed taller, the shadows thicker. I was tired but alert enough to notice the way the headlights seemed dimmer than usual, like the darkness was swallowing them. That's when I saw someone on the side of the road. He was standing completely still, facing the trees, his back to the road. At first, I thought maybe he was a hunter or someone whose car had broken down, but there was no car nearby, no flashlight, no movement. Just a man in a dark coat and boots, unmoving, his head slightly tilted as if listening to something deep in the woods. As I passed, my stomach clenched. In the rearview mirror, he was still there. Only now he was facing me. I drove faster. About a mile later, I saw another figure. This one, closer to the road, crouched low like it was picking something up. But as my headlights swept over it, it jerked upright, too quickly, unnaturally. Its face was obscured by the hood of its jacket, but something about its posture was off. Its arms hung too long, its head cocked at an odd angle. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my throat. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, pushing the car faster, but the road seemed endless, a winding strip of asphalt with no end and no other vehicles. My GPS had frozen, stuck on the same stretch of road for the past 10 minutes, and then the road narrowed into a single-lane bridge over a black creek. In the glow of my headlights, I saw a third figure standing dead center on the bridge. This one wasn't moving at all, just blocking the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the damp asphalt. The figure didn't flinch. It stood perfectly still, like it had been waiting for me. I fumbled for my phone, but there was still no signal. The figure began to tilt its head slowly from one side to the other, like a predator studying prey. I threw the car into reverse and backed up, my tires crunching gravel as I tried to turn around. But in my rearview mirror, I saw the first man, the one from the roadside, standing behind my car now. I don't remember deciding to drive forward, but my foot slammed on the gas. The car lurched forward toward the figure on the bridge. Just before I reached it, it stepped off to the side, melting into the darkness like smoke. I sped across the bridge, heart hammering, my hands slick with sweat. For several miles I drove like that, eyes flicking to the mirrors, half expecting to see one of them in the back seat. The road finally widened, and the trees thinned, revealing open farmland. I told myself I was imagining it all, that it was fatigue and mist and shadows playing tricks. But when I pulled into my aunt's driveway, my stomach dropped. Someone was already standing there. It was a man in a long, dark coat, his back to me facing the fields. He didn't move when my headlights swept over him. He didn't turn when I honked the horn. I killed the engine, my breath fogging the inside of the car as I tried to gather myself. When I finally stepped out, he was gone. The driveway was empty. I ran inside, locking every door, every window. My aunt's house was quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies every sound. I tried to sleep in the guest room, but the shadows under the door seemed darker than they should have been. Just after midnight, I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway. I sat up, holding my breath. The sound came again, slow, deliberate footsteps, moving from one end of the hall to the other. I told myself it was the house settling, an old building shifting in the cold. But the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I didn't move, didn't breathe, and then something touched the doorknob. A soft, slow turn. The lock held, but the knob turned again, harder this time. I scrambled for my phone, but it was dead, even though I had charged it before leaving earlier that evening. The knob stopped turning, and the footsteps receded down the hall. I stayed awake until morning, listening to the silence. When my aunt returned later that day, I told her what had happened. She paled and nodded slowly. "You saw them," she said quietly, like she already knew. She told me she'd seen them too. Figures on the road, in the fields, in the hallway at night. She'd heard them whisper through the walls, had seen them watching from the edge of the woods. They never stayed for long, but they always came back. I left that night and never stayed in her house again. But every so often, when I'm driving on a lonely road at night, I see someone on the shoulder facing away from the road. And sometimes in my rearview mirror, they're facing me. Story the end. The night was still and airless, the kind of night where every sound feels louder than it should. I had been driving for hours, heading back from a friend's wedding in rural Kentucky to my small apartment in Ohio. My phone had lost signal miles back, the GPS frozen on a winding county road. The fields stretched out endlessly on either side, broken up only by tree lines and the occasional weathered barn. The road itself was narrow and cracked, bordered by ditches that glistened faintly with stagnant water reflecting my headlights. I wasn't familiar with the area at all, and as the clock on my dashboard ticked past 1 a.m., the world outside my windshield began to feel increasingly alien. No houses, no cars, just a long, empty road cutting through farmland and woods. The wedding had been fun, but exhausting, and I'd made the mistake of leaving late. My eyelids felt heavy, and I kept rolling down the window for cold air to keep myself awake. About 15 minutes after crossing a rickety one-lane bridge, I noticed something odd. A faint glow off to the right, just beyond a line of trees. At first I thought it was a farmhouse light, but as I passed, I realized it wasn't a building at all. It was more like a faint flickering, like a lantern being carried through the woods. There was no road leading there, no path, just dense underbrush and trees. I slowed the car slightly, leaning closer to the glass. That's when I saw the figure. A person, or at least it looked like a person, standing between the trees. Too far back to make out details, but close enough that my headlights caught a pale shape. They were holding something that glowed faintly, but the light was wrong. It didn't behave like a flashlight or lantern. It pulsed, dimming and brightening like a heartbeat. The figure didn't move, just stood there facing the road, like the light in their hand casting their outline in strange, shifting shadows. I told myself not to stop. People did weird things in the countryside all the time, and it wasn't my business. But as I passed, I felt that sick, instinctive tug of unease in my gut, the kind you can't rationalize away. I drove on, gripping the wheel tightly, watching my rearview mirror. A mile later, the glow appeared again, this time to my left, in the field. The same pulsing light, the same pale shape standing perfectly still. I slowed again, my skin crawling. It wasn't possible for someone to cut across the fields that quickly without a car. And yet there they were, closer now. I pressed the gas, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. The road stretched endlessly ahead, no turns, no intersections. The night felt heavier, the darkness pressing against my car windows. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. Lack of sleep, bad lighting, anything but what my instincts were screaming. Then the light appeared ahead of me. It was in the road itself now, about 50 yards in front of me, flickering faintly. The figure stood beside it, facing me directly. I slammed on my brakes, my car skidding slightly on the cracked asphalt. The headlights lit it up more clearly now, and I saw its face, or what should have been a face. It was pale and smooth, like wax, features faint and unfinished. No eyes, no mouth. Just shallow impressions where they should have been. The thing tilted its head slowly, as though curious. The pulsing light in its hand brightened, casting long, reaching shadows across the road. The sound of the engine idling was deafening in the silence. I reversed hard, tires squealing. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, head tilted, watching me. Or maybe not watching, but aware somehow. As I backed up, my headlights caught movement in the fields on both sides. More pale figures, standing motionless, holding faint, pulsing lights. My breath came in sharp gasps. I threw the car into drive and swerved hard to the right into a rough dirt path that cut through the trees. Branches scraped against my car as I sped down the path, praying it would lead somewhere, anywhere. The path twisted and jolted, my headlights bouncing wildly. After what felt like forever, I emerged onto another road, a slightly larger two-lane stretch with faded yellow lines. Relief washed over me, but only for a second. In my rearview mirror, at the edge of the tree line, faint lights began to appear. One by one, dozens of them, pulsing. I didn't stop. I drove at nearly 80 miles an hour until I saw a gas station, its flickering fluorescent lights like a beacon. I pulled in fast, parked crookedly, and stumbled out of my car. The clerk behind the counter looked up at me, startled as I half ran inside. "You okay?" he asked. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words came out jumbled. He gave me a blank look and said quietly, "You shouldn't be on that road at night. Locals don't use it after dark." When I asked him why, he only shrugged and said, "Just don't. They follow." I stayed in the gas station parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the tree line. No lights appeared this time. No figures. Just the still night. Eventually, I drove away, taking a longer route home. I didn't sleep for days afterward. It's been months since that night, but I still see them sometimes. When I'm driving alone on back roads or even just walking at night near my apartment, I'll catch a faint, pulsing light out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes I'll see a pale shape in the distance. It never moves. It just waits. And every time, it's closer than before. Story the end. The town was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that presses down on your ears and makes every sound feel amplified. I had just finished my late shift at the diner on the edge of town. The rain had started falling lightly, tapping against the windshield as I drove home on the long, empty stretch of highway. Streetlights flickered in the wet gloom, their reflections smearing across the asphalt. The solitude was normal for me. I worked nights, lived alone. But that evening, there was a weight to it, a stillness that felt deliberate, like the town itself was holding its breath. As I drove, I noticed something unusual on the shoulder of the road. A figure, thin and hunched, standing perfectly still in the rain. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. At first, I assumed it was a hitchhiker, but as I drew closer, I realized something was wrong. The figure wasn't moving naturally. It just stood there, head tilted slightly, arms dangling at odd angles, as if it were frozen mid-motion. My gut tightened, and I instinctively slowed the car. When I passed, it didn't flinch, didn't react, just continued to stare at me, or at least the impression of its staring made my stomach knot. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the rain, my tired eyes. I shook it off and continued home, but the sense of being watched followed me all the way. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the rain was heavier, and the house seemed darker than usual, despite the lights inside. I turned on the porch light and quickly went inside, locking the door behind me. I could hear the rain beating against the roof and gutters, a relentless percussion that made the house feel alive. The first signs were small. A door left slightly ajar that I was certain I'd closed. A chair moved an inch to the left. A shadow that seemed too long and too deliberate for the angle of the light. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the wind had shifted. Maybe I'd been careless. Maybe I was letting paranoia take hold. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By midnight, the storm was at its peak. Thunder rumbled across the sky, and lightning illuminated the living room in harsh flashes. I was in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard it, a soft creaking from the hallway. I froze, listening. The sound was deliberate, slow, measured. Footsteps. Barefoot, moving carefully across the floor. My heart raced, and I stayed perfectly still, hoping it was my imagination. But then came the whisper, barely audible over the rain. "Come, look." I bolted upright, the covers clinging to my sweat-damp skin. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Silence, just the storm. I told myself it was nothing, that I was tired, that my mind was playing tricks. But the unease had taken root. It was no longer imagination. I felt it in the air beside a presence that didn't belong, heavy and patient. I grabbed my phone and shone the flashlight toward the hallway. The beam revealed nothing, just the dark corridor stretching into shadows. I took a deep breath, telling myself to be rational, but the sound returned. Scraping, soft but deliberate, like nails across the hardwood. I realized then that the presence wasn't outside, it was in the house. I crept to the living room, heart hammering, and shined the flashlight across the room. The furniture was in place, nothing out of order. But on the far wall, faint scratches marred the paint. Small, shallow, as if something had been clawing at it. My stomach turned. I had checked those walls earlier that evening. They hadn't been there. The rest of the night passed in a tense, exhausted blur. Every sound was magnified. The drip of water from the gutters, the creak of the staircase, the whisper of wind through the cracks in the windows. I didn't sleep. I didn't dare. When the storm finally passed and dawn began to break, the house seemed normal again. But I knew it wasn't. Something had been in my home, and it had left its mark. Days turned into a week, and the occurrences became more frequent. I started noticing objects slightly moved, lights flickering, cold drafts in rooms that should have been warm. At first, it was subtle, almost ignorable. But then came the signs that couldn't be explained away. Wet footprints in the hallway, faint scratches on the bathroom mirror, a shadow moving just beyond my peripheral vision. I tried to record everything, set up cameras, but the footage showed nothing. Just empty rooms, just shadows that didn't belong. One night, the presence became impossible to ignore. I was in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water, when I heard the footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, approaching from the living room. My body froze, the glass clattering to the floor. I turned slowly. Nothing, just the shadows stretching across the walls. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice, low, cold, and whispering. "I'm here." I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, rain soaking through my clothes, the early morning chill biting at my skin. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I called a friend to stay the night, but even with someone else there, the unease lingered. The sense of being watched, of being followed, didn't leave. Weeks passed, and I realized that leaving the house wasn't enough. Even when I went to work, even when I drove through the town, I felt it. A shadow at the edge of my vision, a figure standing silently beneath the flickering streetlights, head tilted, arms dangling unnaturally. It waited, patient, never moving closer, but never disappearing. I moved again, thinking distance would break the connection. For a time, it seemed to help. But storms have a way of bringing it back. One night, driving home through heavy rain, I saw it. Standing under a streetlight, motionless, head tilted, watching. My pulse spiked, and I knew it hadn't followed me in a physical sense. It didn't need to. The presence, the awareness, had latched on, an invisible tether I could neither sever nor escape. I've lived with it ever since. I can feel it in quiet moments, in the subtle shifting of shadows, in the soft scratching at walls, in whispers that catch just at the edge of hearing. It doesn't speak often, but when it does, it's enough to make me freeze. The knowing is worse than the sight. the sense of being observed, studied, hunted. I've tried rational explanations. I've tried ignoring it. I've tried moving, changing routines, avoiding storms. Nothing works. It's patient, and I've learned that some things wait longer than you can imagine. Some things don't need to act immediately. They wait for the perfect moment, when your guard is down, when the storm hits, when the night is grim and still. And every night, when I lie in bed and hear the faint patter of rain on the roof, I know it is there, waiting, waiting, watching, patient, unseen but undeniable. Some nights I hear footsteps pacing, deliberate, slow, following the rhythm of my own heart. Some nights the whispering voice calls my name softly from the darkness. I don't know what it is. I don't want to know. I've learned that some things are not meant to be confronted. They exist in the quiet spaces, the shadows, the corners of vision we don't trust. And when they choose you, they don't leave. Distance doesn't matter, light doesn't matter, locks don't matter. They exist beyond those constraints. Sometimes I see it when I drive through rainstorms, standing under flickering lights at the edge of the road, waiting, watching. I slow down, my heart racing, my pulse hammering, but it doesn't move. It just waits, patient, inevitable. And I realize that it will follow in ways I cannot predict, in ways I cannot escape for as long as I live. I've stopped trying to fight it. The more attention I give, the more real it becomes. I exist in a constant, quiet dread, always aware of the presence at the edge of my perception. I live my life around it, adapting, avoiding, surviving, but I never forget. I never will. And when the next storm comes, I know it will return, standing under the streetlight, silent, patient, watching, waiting for the darkness, waiting for me to let my guard down, waiting for the perfect moment. And I will see it. I will feel it. I will know it is there, as it always has been and always will be. There is no end to it, no safety, no escape, only the knowledge that some things are patient beyond comprehension, that some things do not leave, that some things wait for storms, for grim and still nights, for us to notice just enough to remember that we are never truly alone. Story the end. It was well past midnight when I first began to feel something was wrong. The night outside my small rented cabin in rural Pennsylvania was still, unnaturally still. Not even the chirping of crickets or the rustle of leaves broke the silence. The only light came from a single lamp on the kitchen table, casting a dim, yellow glow across the wooden floorboards. I had taken the cabin for a month, hoping for some peace and quiet after years of city noise. But now, that same quiet felt oppressive, as if the entire world outside had stopped breathing. I sat at the table, writing in my journal, when the first sound came, a faint shuffle, like feet dragging across dry leaves. I froze, pen hovering above the page. The sound came again, closer this time, right outside the window nearest to me. I turned slowly, peering into the darkness, but saw only the reflection of my own pale face in the glass. The forest beyond was an impenetrable wall of black. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was an animal. There were plenty of deer around, maybe a raccoon or stray dog. But then I heard it again, a low, guttural breathing, the kind that rises and falls in slow, heavy waves. This was no animal I knew. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and immediately the sound stopped. The silence rushed back in, thicker than before, pressing against my ears. I locked the door out of instinct, even though the nearest neighbor was 2 miles away and no one even knew I was out here. I turned off the lamp, thinking I might see better into the dark. My eyes strained at the window, searching for any movement. For a moment, I saw nothing. And then, just beyond the tree line, I caught a glimpse of something pale, almost glowing. A face. It was there for a split second before slipping back into the darkness. My stomach lurched. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. I told myself again it was a trick of the light, my imagination, but deep down I knew it wasn't. I could still hear that breathing, soft and heavy, as if it was circling the cabin now. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but of course there was no signal. The battery icon blinked red, threatening to die completely. That night, I barely moved. I sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in my hand, staring at the front door. Hours passed. At some point, the breathing stopped, replaced by another sound, scratching. Faint at first, like fingernails against wood, then louder, more deliberate. It was coming from the back door. I gripped the knife tighter, my knuckles white. The scratching turned to tapping, slow and rhythmic, as if whoever or whatever it was knew exactly how to draw out my fear. Then came the whisper, a single word so faint it might have been my own thoughts. Stay. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. Who's there? I shouted, my voice cracking. Silence. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator answered me. The whisper came again, louder this time. Stay. I ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, but the key jammed in place. I tugged and twisted until it snapped off in my hand. Panic flared in my chest. I ran to the windows, trying to pry one open, but they were all stuck. Every exit sealed. The tapping began again, but this time it was inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the wood and heard it, scratching, crawling, like something moving just beneath the surface. Then faintly, a voice. Stay. I backed away slowly, the knife shaking in my hand. I felt eyes on me, though the cabin was empty. Every shadow seemed to shift, every corner felt occupied. I tried to breathe, tried to think, but all I could hear was that whisper, closer now, surrounding me. Stay. Stay. The hours crawled by. I sat in the middle of the living room, staring at the walls, waiting. Just before dawn, the sound stopped. The cabin was still again, as if nothing had happened. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the couch and fell into a fitful sleep. When I woke, the morning sun was streaming through the windows. Everything looked normal, but when I glanced at the floor, my blood ran cold. There were footprints, muddy, human footprints, leading from the front door to where I had been sleeping. They stopped right beside the couch, as if someone had stood over me while I slept, watching. I didn't stay another night. I packed my things in a frenzy and left the cabin, driving until I reached the nearest gas station. The clerk gave me a strange look when I told him which cabin I had rented. He shook his head slowly and said, "That place has been empty for years. Last guy who stayed there, well, he never left. People say the forest took him." I never went back. But sometimes, even now, in the middle of the night when everything is quiet, I hear it again, that faint scratching, that soft whisper in my ear, "Stay." Story the end. It was one of those nights where everything felt unnaturally still. The air itself seemed heavy, like it had weight, pressing down on everything around me. I had been on the road since late afternoon, trying to make it from my apartment in Ohio to a small cabin my uncle owned in upstate New York. I'd been there as a kid, but never on my own, and certainly not at night. The GPS had rerouted me twice because of flooded roads, and by the time it was past 10 p.m., I realized I was driving a stretch of highway I didn't recognize at all. The trees on either side of the road leaned inward, forming a kind of tunnel. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness. The yellow lines painted down the center were faded, broken in places as if no one had driven this route for years. My car's radio had lost signal about an hour before, and the only sound was the low hum of the engine and the occasional groan of the tires on wet asphalt. As I rounded a slow curve, I caught sight of something strange ahead. A pickup truck sat parked on the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking. That alone wasn't odd, but it was the way it sat that chilled me. The nose of the truck pointed toward the trees, its back wheels almost in the lane, as if it had swerved suddenly and stopped. The driver's door was open, swinging slightly. I slowed down, rolling past it carefully. The truck was old, rust creeping up its panels. Inside, the dashboard glowed faintly, but there was no one in the driver's seat. No movement, no sign of anyone at all. I thought maybe the driver had gone into the woods for help, but the trees were so thick that even a flashlight beam would have been swallowed whole. I gripped the wheel tighter, telling myself it wasn't my problem, and pressed on. My rearview mirror showed the truck fading into darkness, but for a split second, I could have sworn I saw someone standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the truck's rear bumper, a figure, tall and thin, unmoving. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to shake it off, turning up the defrost to keep my windshield clear. The road continued on, but I noticed something unnerving. The further I drove, the more the world seemed to lose detail. Street signs were bent or unreadable, and houses that should have dotted the rural roadsides were absent. It felt like I was heading deeper into a place that didn't want me there. Then, my phone vibrated violently in the cup holder. No signal. Just a blank screen. It buzzed once more and died, even though I'd charged it before leaving. That was when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like wet soil and something metallic, but it grew stronger with each passing minute. My stomach turned. I rolled down the window for air, but the smell only intensified, a sickly, sweet rot mixed with iron. Another mile passed before I saw it, a small building just off the road. It looked like an old gas station, boarded up, its sign faded to illegibility. But there was light inside, a dim glow flickering behind the dirty windows. Desperate to check my phone or just see another human being, I pulled off. My tires crunched on the gravel as I parked. The moment I stepped out of the car, the air felt colder, like stepping from summer into late winter. The front door of the station creaked as I pushed it open. Inside was an empty room. No shelves, no counters, nothing but a single wooden chair in the center. On it sat a small, outdated radio, its static rising and falling. I hesitated, looking around. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and footprints tracked through the dust on the floor, leading toward the back door. The smell was stronger here, nearly overwhelming. I turned back to leave, but stopped. Through the dirty glass of the front window, I saw my car, but not as I'd left it. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat, silhouetted by my own headlights. The figure sat perfectly still, head tilted slightly, hands gripping the wheel. My chest tightened as I tried to make sense of it. No one had been there when I got out. I hadn't seen or heard anyone approach. I moved closer to the window, heart hammering. The figure's face slowly turned toward me. Even through the grime of the glass and the glare of the headlights, I saw it clearly. Its face was gray, hollow-eyed, mouth slightly open, as if about to speak. But it didn't. It just stared. I bolted for the back door of the gas station, stumbling over the chair. The radio hissed louder, words emerging through the static in a voice I didn't recognize. "Stay here. Stay." My hands shook as I fumbled with the door handle. It finally gave, and I stumbled out into the night, finding myself behind the station in a narrow clearing that led into the trees. The forest loomed ahead, dark and silent, except for the sound of something moving through it. Something big, but slow, deliberate. Branches cracked underfoot somewhere in the distance. I turned back toward the gas station, but the building was gone. In its place was nothing but more trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. My car, the road, the building, all gone. I could feel it behind me before I heard it, the same figure from the truck, from the driver's seat, from the edge of the woods. It was close now, the air around me colder, heavier, like breathing ice. I ran. My footsteps pounded against wet soil, branches clawing at my face and arms. The smell followed me, a mix of rot and rain growing stronger. No matter how far I ran, the trees didn't change. It was like being trapped in a loop. The whispering began then, soft and low, curling around my thoughts. Not words at first, just sounds, but soon forming phrases. "Stay with me. You're almost home." My heart thudded against my ribs. The voice wasn't threatening. It was pleading. That was somehow worse. Ahead, a dim glow appeared, like a streetlight through fog. I stumbled toward it, desperate. The glow grew until I broke into a small clearing. In the center was an old wooden sign, half buried in moss. I could barely make out the letters, "Stay." The rest was worn away. Around the sign stood several figures, all pale, all unmoving. They weren't facing me. They were facing inward, toward the sign. I backed away slowly, but the whispering grew louder, overlapping voices now, like dozens of people speaking at once. My vision blurred, my knees weak. One of the figures turned its head slightly, then another and another, until they were all looking at me. Their eyes were empty hollows, their mouths stretched too wide. I turned and ran, but my legs felt heavy, like running through water. The whispering followed, rising to a chorus. I tripped, falling hard into mud. When I lifted my head, I was back on the road, lying in the middle of the wet asphalt. My car sat a few feet away, engine idling, headlights on. I crawled toward it, shaking. The driver's door was open and the seat was empty. I scrambled inside, slammed the door, and hit the gas. The car lurched forward, tires screeching. I didn't look back. I drove until I saw familiar road signs again, until the trees thinned and houses appeared. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. When I finally stopped at a rest area, I noticed something chilling. Muddy handprints lined the outside of my car's windows, pressed in strange angles like someone had been leaning in from every side. Inside, my passenger seat was wet, as if someone had been sitting there. That was 3 years ago. I haven't driven that route again. Sometimes, late at night, I'll be on some quiet road and catch a glimpse of a figure in the tree line, pale and unmoving, just watching. And every so often, in the middle of a rainstorm, my radio will hiss and crackle with a voice that whispers, "Stay with me, you're almost home." I never respond. I just keep driving. Story the end. The fog hung low over the highway, thick and suffocating, swallowing the yellow lines and the reflective signs until the road ahead looked like a gray abyss. Jenna had left her friend's birthday party late, around 11:30 p.m., and had taken the back roads to avoid the longer, well-lit main highway. She liked driving through the woods at night sometimes. It gave her a sense of quiet freedom. But tonight, it felt wrong. The usual comforting hum of her car engine sounded hollow, almost echoing in the silence. The road curved sharply through the trees, and the fog made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Jenna slowed, gripping the wheel tightly, her knuckles white. That's when she saw it, a figure standing near the shoulder. At first, she thought it might be a deer or some stranded driver, but as she got closer, she realized it was a man, or at least it looked like one. He wore dark clothes and a hat pulled low over his face, standing perfectly still as if carved from shadow. Her stomach tightened. She tried to rationalize it, maybe a hitchhiker, maybe a jogger late at night, but her gut told her to keep driving. She eased the car past, giving the figure as much space as she could. When she glanced in the rearview mirror, her breath caught. The figure was following her. Not running, not walking, just gliding, moving with a precision that was impossible. Panic began to rise. She turned on the radio, hoping for the comfort of music or voices, but all she got was static, low and hissing. She fiddled with the dial, trying different stations, still nothing but static. Her pulse hammered in her chest. She needed to reach a place with lights, people, safety. A few miles down, she spotted a gas station open late. Relief surged as she pulled in, tires squealing slightly on the wet pavement. She ran inside, soaked from the mist, her heart racing. The clerk, a young man with an anxious expression, looked up. "Can I help you?" he asked. Jenna swallowed hard. I think someone's following me, or something. Please, call the police." The clerk nodded, picking up the phone. Jenna glanced out the window, expecting to see the man or the impossible gliding figure. But the lot was empty. Just her car, its headlights reflecting off the wet asphalt. She exhaled shakily, trying to calm herself. She waited while the police came, explained her story. They drove her along the road she had taken, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of another vehicle, nothing to suggest anyone, or anything, had been there. The fog had lifted, leaving only the still night and the distant glow of the town. Jenna never forgot that night. Weeks later, she would sometimes think she saw a shadow at the edge of her vision while driving home, or a figure standing silently by a roadside she knew well. Her friends dismissed it as stress, fatigue, or imagination. But she knew what she had seen. She could still feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest, the impossibility of its movements, the cold, faceless presence that had followed her along that deserted road. Even years later, when driving through empty streets or quiet highways, she feels it. The sense of being watched, of something moving with her, just out of sight, a presence that bends reality, that doesn't belong in the world of the living, yet moves through it with terrifying ease. She's never stopped feeling it, never truly convinced herself it was a hallucination, because some nights, in the stillness, in the fog, in the empty stretches of road, she knows it's still out there, waiting, watching. Story the end. It was a grim and quiet night in northern Indiana when I decided to take the long way back to my apartment. I'd been visiting my parents in their small hometown, and instead of taking the interstate like I usually did, I thought a slower route through the back roads would clear my mind. It was past 1 a.m., and the world outside felt frozen in time. Not a single car passed me. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that seems to swallow sound rather than carry it. The road was a 2-lane strip of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of empty farmland. No houses, no gas stations, no lights. Just me, the car, and the night. My headlights caught a thin mist rolling across the fields, glowing faintly in the beams. The GPS on my phone showed only a thin gray line through a blank green space. My music cut out when I lost the signal, and the sudden absence of sound made the emptiness feel even deeper. I was starting to feel uneasy when I noticed a faint glow ahead. It wasn't headlights, but something softer, flickering. As I drew closer, I saw a small building on the side of the road. what looked like an old roadside store or maybe a diner. A single fluorescent bulb buzzed above the doorway, casting a sickly pale light. The sign above it was so weathered it was unreadable, and the parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds. I slowed down, debating whether to pull in. My gas tank was still half full, but the idea of stopping for a quick break, maybe a soda or some directions, was tempting. I parked under the flickering light and shut off the engine. Immediately, the silence deepened, as if the night itself was holding its breath. When I stepped out, the smell hit me, damp earth mixed with something faintly metallic. It reminded me of an old basement or a wet penny jar. I walked up to the door, which was slightly ajar, and pushed it open. A weak bell above it gave a hollow chime. Inside, the store was dim and dusty, with shelves mostly empty except for a few random items. Ancient-looking snack bags, bottles of soda with faded labels, cans of soup so old their print was rubbed off. A counter sat at the far end with an old cash register, and next to it a corkboard plastered with yellowed papers. "Hello?" I called out softly. My voice echoed strangely, like it was bouncing off walls much farther away than they actually were. From behind the counter came a faint sound, a dragging noise, slow and deliberate, like someone pulling something across the floor. "Sorry," I said quickly, my heart picking up, "just passing through, looking for directions." The sound stopped. The silence pressed in. I stepped closer to the counter and noticed something out of place. A Polaroid photo sat next to the register. I picked it up. It showed the exact store I was standing in, but from outside at night. In the corner of the photo was a figure, a tall, thin silhouette standing by the door. I glanced up at the window behind me. Nothing there. That's when I saw movement from the back of the store, a tall shape in the shadows, too still to be natural. It wasn't hiding. It was just there, standing, watching. The outline of its head was slightly tilted, like it was studying me. I dropped the photo. I bolted out of the store, the bell shrieking as I slammed the door behind me. The night air felt heavier, colder, almost solid. I ran for my car, fumbling with the keys. When I finally got inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. My headlights swept across the cracked lot. That's when I saw it again. The same figure, now standing at the edge of the field, unmoving, head still tilted. I hit the gas, spinning gravel as I pulled out onto the road. My heart thudded in my ears. I didn't look back for miles, too scared of what I might see. But eventually, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. There it was. The figure was in the road behind me, shrinking in the distance, but perfectly still, watching me disappear. I drove until I found a small all-night diner off the highway. The neon open sign glowed like a beacon. Inside, the place was bright, warm, and smelled of coffee and fried food. A waitress in a faded uniform greeted me with a tired smile. "You okay, Han?" she asked. I nodded, but didn't answer. She poured me a coffee and left me alone at a corner booth. I sat there trying to calm down, hands trembling around the cup. After a few minutes, the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in wearing a black hoodie. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide and dark. He didn't order anything, just sat at the counter, staring straight ahead. My stomach sank. I paid for my coffee and left. When I reached my car, the driver's door was unlocked. I knew I had locked it. Sitting on the seat was another Polaroid photo. This one was of me, sitting at the booth inside the diner, coffee cup in hand. I didn't go back to my apartment right away. I drove until the sun came up, checking the mirrors every few seconds. Even now, weeks later, Polaroid photos keep showing up at my place. Blurry, grainy shots of me in random places. At work, at the grocery store, inside my own living room. I don't know how they get there. I've changed the locks twice. I don't sleep at night anymore. Sometimes when I glance outside at 3 a.m., I see someone in a black hoodie across the street, standing perfectly still, head tilted just slightly, watching. Every time I think it's over, another photo appears, and the smell from that store, damp and metallic, comes back to me as if the night itself followed me home. Story the end. It was the middle of February, the kind of night when the sky over northern Ohio looks like a black sheet of glass, and the snow on the ground swallows all sound. I had been driving since dusk after finishing an overnight delivery route, too stubborn to pull off the highway even though my eyes burned from exhaustion. My GPS had me cut across a stretch of county roads to avoid construction on the interstate. roads I'd never seen before, lined with bare trees and old barns left to rot in the cold. The air outside was so still it felt like a vacuum. My headlights cut through a drifting curtain of snowflakes, and the asphalt glistened with patches of black ice. There were no other cars, no houses with lights in the windows, just mile after mile of two-lane road bordered by ditches and woods. Somewhere past midnight, the radio cut out into static, and my cell service vanished. That's when I first saw the man walking. He appeared out of the fog just beyond my high beams, a tall, thin figure trudging along the shoulder with no coat, his hands dangling at his sides. I slowed a little, instinct telling me to help, but something about him made me keep my distance. His head hung at an unnatural angle, and even through the snow, I could see his skin was pale, almost gray. As I passed, he didn't lift his head, didn't even flinch at the sound of my tires, just kept walking, slow and deliberate. My rearview mirror showed only swirling snow. No man. My pulse jumped. Maybe he'd slipped into the ditch or turned into the woods. I pressed on, telling myself it didn't matter. But a few miles later, when the road curved past an abandoned gas station with boarded-up windows, there he was again, standing under the old sign this time, facing the road. Still, his head was bent too far forward, like his neck couldn't hold it up. I tightened my grip on the wheel and kept driving. My breath fogged up the windshield faster than the defroster could clear it. I turned the heat off, but the car felt warmer, like someone else was inside with me. Another few miles, another curve. The snow thickened, falling sideways now. And again, he was there. This time not walking, not standing by the road, but crouched low in the ditch, arms wrapped around his knees. As my headlights hit him, his head snapped up. I didn't see a face, just two black pits where eyes should be, catching the light like oil. I slammed my foot on the gas. The engine whined, tires sliding on a patch of ice before gripping again. My heart pounded so hard my vision blurred. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't dare. I just drove. Then the engine sputtered. Once, twice. The dashboard lights flickered. The car slowed no matter how hard I pressed the pedal. I tried to restart it. Nothing. Dead silence except for the faint hiss of falling snow. I coasted to a stop on the shoulder, surrounded by woods so dark the trees looked like holes cut out of the world. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove box and stepped out, my boots crunching on the icy road. The air burned my lungs. My breath rose in clouds. Snow clung to my eyelashes. The car sat silent, its hazard lights blinking weakly, casting red pulses into the dark. That's when I heard it. Footsteps crunching in the snow, slow and steady, coming from behind the car. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam cut through the snow, but showed nothing. Just the empty road stretching behind me. The footsteps stopped. Then, in the glow of my hazard lights, letters began to form on the rear windshield, traced by an invisible finger from the outside. FOLOW. My throat went dry. My body screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The letters dripped into the melting snow on the glass. I jumped back into the car, slammed the door, and locked it. The engine wouldn't start. My flashlight rolled onto the floor. Outside, the footsteps started again. This time, they circled the car slowly. Crunch, 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 until they stopped at my driver's side window. The glass frosted over, my own panicked breath mixing with the cold from outside. Something leaned close. I couldn't see it, but the outline of a head appeared in the condensation, inches from my face, as if it were pressing against the window from the other side. Then, faintly at first, I heard it. A voice, low and rasping, not coming from outside but from inside the car. "Follow me." I scrambled at the ignition, turning the key over and over until the engine roared back to life. Without looking at the window, I hit the gas and sped down the road, tires slipping on ice. In the mirror, I caught one last glimpse of the figure standing in the middle of the road, head tilted, watching as my taillights disappeared into the snow. I didn't stop until I reached the interstate again. Even then, I drove with the radio off, phone silent, eyes fixed ahead. When I got to my cabin, the parking lot was empty, snow undisturbed. I shut the door behind me and tried to convince myself it had been exhaustion, a trick of the snow, nothing real. But the next morning, when I went to clear ice from my car, I saw it written again on the windshield, carved deeper this time into the frost so it wouldn't melt away. Follow me. Ever since, I hear footsteps at night when I'm alone. Sometimes when I drive those empty roads, I see him ahead of me again, walking head bent, always a few yards beyond my headlights. And sometimes in the dead stillness of night, when the snow hushes every sound, I hear his voice in the dark. Follow me. I never do. Story the end. It was one of those nights when everything feels heavier than it should. The air, the silence, the shadows, it all presses down on you like an invisible weight. I was working late at a small manufacturing plant on the edge of a sleepy town in southern Indiana. The plant shut down at 11 p.m. sharp most nights, but on that particular Tuesday, a shipment delay had left me with a stack of paperwork to finish. By the time I clocked out, it was past midnight, and the parking lot was empty except for my car. The building was surrounded by woods on three sides, and the town's main road was a good mile away. On quiet nights, the only sound you'd hear was the hum of the transformers behind the building and the rustling of leaves in the tree line. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me. No wind, no distant traffic, just that kind of unnatural stillness that makes your skin prickle. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots echoing louder than it should have. My car was parked near the edge of the lot, facing the trees. As soon as I got in, I had the strangest sensation, the feeling you get when you're being watched. It was immediate and overwhelming, like a spotlight on the back of my neck. I turned and looked toward the woods. That's when I saw it. A figure. Standing just inside the tree line, barely visible in the dim glow from the plant's security lights. It was tall, thin, and completely still. Too still. Its arms hung loosely at its sides, but its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was studying me. I froze, my hand halfway to the ignition. My eyes strained to make out details, but its features were obscured by shadow. All I could tell was that it was pale, very pale, and its clothes looked dark and soaked, as if it had been standing in water. I started the car, my hands shaking, headlights flicking on and cutting across the edge of the woods. The figure didn't move, not a twitch. I reversed out of the space, keeping my eyes on it the whole time. By the time my headlights swept back across the trees, it was gone. I tried to laugh it off as I drove down the empty road leading back to town. Late nights, tired eyes, maybe I'd imagined it. But the feeling didn't fade. It sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. The road back to town cut through a dense patch of woods, no streetlights, no houses, just black trees on either side. As I rounded a slow curve, my headlights caught something in the distance. Someone or something standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding on the damp pavement. My car came to a stop about 20 yards away. There it was again, the same figure from the parking lot. Pale, soaked clothes, head tilted. Its arms hung at its sides, fingers long and unmoving. The weirdest thing was its face, or rather, the lack of it. There were shadows where eyes should be, a faint impression of a mouth, but nothing distinct, like a bad photograph. My heart hammered in my ears. I hit the horn. It didn't react. I flicked my high beams on and off. Nothing. It just stood there. Every instinct told me to get out of there. I swerved around it, tires screeching, glancing in my rearview mirror as I passed. The road behind me was empty. Nothing there. By the time I reached town, my hands were slick with sweat. I drove straight to my apartment and locked every door and window. I told myself I'd been overworked, sleep-deprived, seeing things. That had to be it. The next night, I stayed late again. Couldn't be helped. The same shift, the same empty parking lot. But this time, when I stepped outside, the air was different. Colder. Thicker. The woods looked darker than usual, like the shadows had spread. I told myself not to look, just get in the car, drive home. But I couldn't help it. My eyes drifted to the tree line. It was closer now. Standing at the edge of the lot, no longer half hidden. Pale skin, wet clothes clinging to its thin frame, head tilted in that same unnatural angle. And now I could hear something, a faint, slow scraping sound, like nails dragging across concrete. I jumped into my car and locked the doors. My hands were trembling so badly I fumbled the keys. When the engine finally roared to life, I looked up, and it was gone. I drove out of there as fast as I could, heart racing, stomach churning. I didn't go back to the plant the next day. Called in sick. Slept with all the lights on, but it didn't stop. 3 nights later, I woke up at 3 a.m. to a noise outside my apartment window. A soft, deliberate tapping, not random, not like a branch. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. I didn't want to look. but something made me. I pulled the curtain aside. It was standing there on the sidewalk outside my window, pale, soaked, head tilted, watching me, or whatever it does in place of watching. Its face looked clearer now, but wrong. The eyes were just deep hollows, and the mouth was a faint, jagged line stretched too wide. I stumbled back, tripping over a chair. When I looked again, it was gone. Just an empty sidewalk glistening under the streetlight. I moved apartments a week later, across town. Told myself a new place would fix it, but every few nights I see it again, standing across the street, in the reflection of a shop window, in the shadows of a parking lot, always pale, always soaked, always watching. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it picked me. All I know is that once you see it, once you really see it, it never leaves. It just waits. Story the end. The night I'm about to tell you about happened a few years ago when I was living alone in a small rented house on the edge of a nowhere town in northern Ohio. It was one of those long, lonely stretches between steady jobs where you take whatever work you can, and my shift at a printing warehouse ended at 1:30 a.m. I always dreaded the drive home. The road was lined with bare trees, and the highway lights were so few and far between that most of the time you were just staring into a black wall with only your headlights to carve out a sliver of visibility. That particular night had a strange stillness to it. No rain, no snow, no wind. Even the radio refused to tune in to anything but static. I remember rolling down the window a little to try to shake off the drowsiness, and the air that came in felt cold and heavy, like it had been sitting still for 100 years. The further from town I got, the more my unease built. The first odd thing I noticed was a shape on the shoulder of the road ahead. From a distance, it looked like a person. My instinct said to drive past and not make eye contact, but the shape was still almost rigid, and my conscience whispered maybe someone had broken down. As I got closer, the headlights lit it up. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. He wore a dark, floor-length coat and stood facing the woods, his back to the road. The coat was bone dry, which made no sense because the ground and trees glistened with moisture from a heavy frost. I slowed down, craning my neck to see if maybe there was a car in the ditch or some other sign he needed help. He didn't turn around. He didn't move. Just stood there, coat hem brushing the tops of his boots. When I passed, I caught a glimpse of his hand hanging loosely at his side. It was pale, too pale, and the fingers seemed unusually long. I told myself not to look in the mirror. Of course I did. In the red glow of my taillights, he'd turned to face the road. I couldn't see his face, just the shape of his head tilted at an unnatural angle, like he was trying to listen for something. I pressed the gas and got out of there fast. When I finally reached my house, a squat one-story place with a small yard and no neighbors for at least half a mile, I told myself I was just overtired, maybe spooked by a hunter or some night wanderer. I locked the door, shut off the lights, and crawled into bed. It was around 3 a.m. when the knocking started. Slow, deliberate on my front door. 3 knocks. Then silence. My heart jumped into my throat. I hadn't heard a car pull up, no crunch of footsteps on the gravel. I sat perfectly still in the dark, hoping whoever it was would go away. Another 3 knocks. This time, softer. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but, of course, there was no signal. My house always had spotty reception, but this was full-on no service. The knocking stopped. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. I told myself it was nothing. I eventually lay back down, still clutching the phone. That's when I heard it again, but this time it wasn't knocking. It was tapping on the window near my bed. The tiniest, most deliberate tapping you can imagine. Like a fingernail, slow and steady. I couldn't move. The blinds were drawn, and I knew if I looked, I'd see something I didn't want to. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and went to the kitchen for the baseball bat I kept there. As I crept back, the tapping stopped. My pulse was in my ears. I waited. Silence. Then, from the opposite side of the house, a creak. The sound of a floorboard under weight. Someone or something was inside. I gripped the bat and backed toward the hallway, my eyes darting to the dark living room. I didn't see anything at first. But then the air changed. I could smell damp earth. Not dirt like from a yard. This was richer, heavier, like a freshly dug grave. The figure was standing near the back door. Same coat, same impossible stillness. The hood was up now, and though there was no light in the room except the dim glow of the digital clock, I could see the inside of the hood was nothing but darkness. It was like staring into a hole in the world. I blinked hard. The figure was closer. It hadn't moved, but it was closer, less than 10 feet away. I whispered, "What do you want?" It didn't answer. Its head tilted slowly, impossibly far, until one shoulder nearly touched where a cheek should have been. Then its arm rose, pointing one long finger at me. The sleeve slid back enough for me to see a pale, root-like limb instead of a hand. I bolted for the front door. The deadbolt jammed at first, like something was holding it from the other side, then finally gave way. I ran barefoot into the yard and didn't stop running until I hit the main road. I didn't even look back at the house. I've been staying at a friend's place ever since. She thinks I had a nightmare. She hasn't been able to explain why. When she drove me back to collect some clothes the next morning, the inside of my front door had deep scratches spelling out my name. Last night, I was on her couch, trying to sleep. The air was perfectly still. No wind, no rain. At 3:04 a.m., I woke up to the smell of wet earth. Then the tapping started on the window. Story the end. It was one of those nights in rural Ohio where the darkness felt almost alive. The air hung heavy and still, a humid weight that pressed against the windows and made the distant trees sway without wind. In the small town of Ashbrook, most people had long since gone to bed, their houses dark and silent. But 28-year-old Emily Carter was still driving home from a late shift at the local diner, her old Dodge Caravan rattling softly over the uneven asphalt. She had moved to Ashbrook only a few months earlier for a quiet life, a break from city noise, and had chosen a modest rental house on the outskirts, where the woods came uncomfortably close to her backyard. Tonight, she realized, she might have underestimated how unsettling isolation could be. Emily's drive had been normal at first. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating stretches of fog that clung to the roadside like specters. She thought she saw movement in the trees, shapes that disappeared when she blinked, but she blamed fatigue. The roads in Ashbrook were narrow, winding, and poorly lit, and her imagination filled the void between the dim pools of light with shadows that didn't exist. Halfway home, she passed a narrow clearing in the woods where a derelict farmhouse leaned at a precarious angle. The windows were dark and the roof sagged, but there was a light flickering faintly inside, a weak, unsteady glow like a candle struggling against the darkness. Emily slowed, squinting through the fog, and saw a figure move past one of the windows. At first, she thought it might be a neighbor checking on the property, but the movements were wrong, jerky, unnatural. She shivered, gripping the steering wheel tighter, and drove on. Arriving at her rental house, Emily was relieved to see the porch lights still on. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, noting the familiar smell of the house, dust, old wood, and the faint lingering aroma of pine from the nearby forest. She flicked on the lights, but the unease clung to her like a second skin. Every creak, every groan of the house settling, sounded like it belonged to something alive, something watching. The first night passed without incident, though Emily barely slept. Strange sounds came from the forest, snapping branches, soft rustles that she could never quite identify. By the second night, the noises had escalated. A scraping sound echoed from the kitchen, faint but persistent, like nails dragged slowly across wood. She tried to tell herself it was an animal, but the pattern was too deliberate. By the third night, Emily could no longer ignore the feeling of being watched. She started locking every door and window multiple times, checking the blinds, even barricading the back door with a chair. Still, the presence persisted. Sometimes she would glimpse a figure in the shadows of the living room, just at the edge of her vision. It was tall and thin, limbs bending in ways that didn't make sense, always just out of reach, disappearing whenever she looked directly at it. One night around 2 a.m., Emily awoke to a soft, deliberate tapping at her bedroom window. Her heart froze. The sound was slow, measured, almost coaxing. She told herself it was a branch brushing against the glass, but the intensity of the tap made her doubt it. Holding her breath, she peered through the blinds and saw nothing, only the impenetrable black of the forest beyond. When she finally let out a shaky breath, she realized the tapping hadn't stopped. It had moved to the front door. Emily's pulse raced as she retrieved a heavy flashlight and crept toward the door. The porch was empty. but muddy footprints led away into the woods. They were too large, too elongated to be human. Panic surged through her, and she retreated inside, locking the door again and trembling. She couldn't explain what she had seen or why her gut told her it wasn't an animal. Something was out there, and it knew she was alone. Over the next week, the harassment intensified. Objects in the house moved on their own, cups knocked over, chairs shifted, doors ajar when she was certain she had locked them. At night, she could hear whispers, low and indistinct, echoing from the woods, or perhaps the walls themselves. Sometimes it was a faint breath in her ear. Other times, it was the sound of dragging steps across the floorboards. Emily stopped leaving the house after dark, surviving on takeout and groceries delivered during daylight hours. One particularly grim night, Emily decided to confront whatever was haunting her. She set up her phone to record, took a kitchen knife, and sat in the living room with the lights off. Hours passed without incident. Then she heard it. A slow, deliberate scraping sound from the corner of the room, followed by a soft, wet breathing. Her flashlight flickered on automatically, it wasn't in her hands, and revealed the figure. Tall, emaciated, with glowing, pale eyes that reflected the weak light. Its limbs were twisted in ways that made her stomach churn, and its head tilted unnaturally as it regarded her. Emily screamed, but no sound came out. The figure didn't move closer, it simply stared, studying her. She swung the knife, but it passed through air as though it weren't really there. The shape tilted its head and then vanished, leaving behind a cold, lingering darkness that seemed to seep into her very bones. Emily left Ashbrook the very next morning, abandoning the house and everything in it. She didn't tell anyone why, fearing she would sound insane. But the experience didn't end with her departure. Weeks later, she received a small package at her new apartment in Columbus, Ohio. Inside was a single blank note. When she unfolded it, faintly scratched into the paper were the words, "We are still watching." Even now, years later, Emily cannot spend a night in complete darkness. She avoids reflections, windows, and mirrors, always glancing at the edges of rooms, every shadow. Sometimes, in moments of grim, still silence, she hears the soft scraping of something moving just out of sight. She has come to accept it as part of her life, a permanent companion that will never leave her alone. She knows deep down that it is patient. It waits for her mistakes, for her moments of weakness, and it remembers. And Emily also knows with a cold certainty that one day, if it wants to, it will find her again. Story the end. It was late October, the kind of cold where your breath comes out in visible clouds and every sound seems sharper. I had agreed to house sit for my cousin in a small town in northern Maine. His house sat at the edge of a patch of forest about 2 miles from the nearest neighbor, and when night came, it was the kind of darkness you don't find anywhere near a city. No streetlights, no passing cars, just an endless blanket of trees and a sky that seemed to swallow every sound. The first night passed without much incident. I sat in the living room scrolling on my phone, occasionally glancing out the window at the black wall of pines. Even then I felt it, a prickle at the back of my neck, like someone was standing just out of sight. I chalked it up to nerves. The second night was when things began to shift. I had been upstairs in the guest bedroom, reading by the dim glow of a lamp, when I heard it. A single sharp knock on the back door. Not a branch brushing the siding, not the house settling, but a clear, deliberate knock. I froze, straining to listen. It came again. 2 knocks, slower this time. I went downstairs, every step feeling heavier than the last, and peeked out the kitchen window. The porch light illuminated the back steps and a slice of the yard. Nothing, just the mist rolling off the trees. I waited, heart pounding, before slowly unlocking the door and opening it an inch. The cold hit me first, followed by a strange silence, the kind where even the crickets stop. I closed the door quickly, locking it again. That's when I saw the smear on the glass. A faint, oily handprint, fingers too long, pressed against the pane. I backed away, pulse hammering in my throat. I checked every lock in the house twice before retreating upstairs. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps downstairs. Not shuffling, not creaking. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving from one room to another. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe my cousin had returned early. Maybe it was a neighbor checking on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't either. I crept to the top of the stairs, peering down into the living room. The house was dark, but the moonlight through the windows outlined everything in faint silver. Nothing moved, yet the footsteps continued, this time closer, as if circling below. My breath caught in my chest as I saw it, a shadow stretching across the floor that didn't belong to anything. It was shaped like a person but taller, its arms unnaturally long, its head tilted as if listening. I stumbled back, knocking over a small lamp. The noise was deafening in the silence. The shadow shifted, turning toward the stairs. I bolted into the bedroom and locked the door. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone. No signal. The footsteps began up the stairs. Slow, steady. The wood creaked under its weight. I pressed myself against the far wall, gripping a heavy book like it would do any good. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The knob turned once, then again, harder. I could hear it breathing, a sound like dry leaves being crushed. Then, silence. I stayed frozen until dawn, my body aching from tension. When the sun finally rose, I opened the door. The hallway was empty. The stairs were empty. But at the bottom of the staircase, smeared across the last step, was another handprint. Dark, oily, the fingers too long. I packed my things and left that morning. My cousin called later to ask why I'd left early. When I told him what had happened, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You saw it too." He explained that for years he'd been hearing knocks at night, seeing shadows where there shouldn't be any, finding those strange handprints on his windows. He'd learned to ignore it, to never open the door after dark, or to never look directly at the thing when it appeared in the yard. He hadn't told me because he didn't want to scare me off. I've never gone back. But some nights, especially when I'm alone, I hear it again. Slow knocks on the back door, patient footsteps moving across the floorboards, and the faint sound of breathing just outside my window. Story the end. The night was colder than usual for late October in northern Indiana. The little town of Westfield had shut down hours ago, its streets empty except for the occasional parked car and dim porch light. I had taken an overnight house-sitting job for a coworker who had flown out of state for a funeral. The house was on the very edge of town, surrounded by old farmland with no close neighbors. It wasn't my first time house-sitting that, but the moment I stepped into that place, I felt something off. It wasn't anything obvious. No strange smells, no weird noises, just a heaviness. The air inside seemed a touch too still, like the house had been waiting a long time for someone to come inside. The house itself was a 2-story colonial with creaky floorboards and tall windows that overlooked a backyard choked with weeds. My coworker had left a list of things to do. Feed the cat, bring in the mail, water the plants. Easy stuff. She hadn't mentioned anything else. The first night was quiet enough, though I found it hard to sleep. Every old house creaks, I reminded myself as the floorboards popped and shifted. Still, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up abruptly. There was no sound, no reason to wake up, but I had the distinct feeling that someone had just been in the room. I sat up, straining my ears. Nothing. The cat was asleep at the foot of the bed. The house was dead silent. I got up, walked around, checked the locks. Everything was secure. It took me over an hour to fall back asleep. The next night, I left the hallway light on and kept my phone close. Around 3 a.m., I woke up again. This time, I heard something. Faint, but real. A low creaking noise coming from downstairs. Slow, rhythmic, like someone was walking very carefully across the living room floor. The cat sat up too, ears perked, eyes wide. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might wake the dead. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and crept to the top of the stairs. From the landing, I could see part of the living room below. It was dark, except for the faint glow from a streetlight outside. Then, from the shadows near the front door, something shifted. At first, I thought it was just the coat rack, but then it moved again, slowly, deliberately. A figure hunched low, pale skin glinting faintly in the dim light. It wasn't my coworker. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The figure moved strangely, as though its joints didn't work right. It turned its head toward me, and though the face was mostly in shadow, I could see its mouth, open too wide, like it was smiling. I stumbled back into the bedroom, slammed the door, locked it. My phone showed no service. The cat hissed, low and sharp, crouched under the bed. For what felt like an eternity, I heard nothing but my own breathing. Then came a sound at the door. Not a knock, not scratching, just the handle turning slightly, then stopping. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting against the wall with the lamp on, gripping a heavy flashlight like a weapon. By morning, the house was normal again. No sign of forced entry. No footprints. No figure. I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, a trick of the dark. That evening, as the sun set, I noticed something new. On the kitchen counter was a small smear of something dark, reddish brown. Blood, maybe, or mud. Next to it was a single wet footprint. Bare. Small. Pointed straight toward the stairs. I cleaned it up, telling myself it was the cat, though I knew it wasn't. The third night was the worst. I didn't even try to sleep. I sat up in the armchair in the living room with every light on, the cat in my lap. The clock ticked steadily toward 3 a.m. At exactly 2:58, the lights flickered and went out. The cat bolted. I fumbled for my phone, still no service. The house was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels solid. Then I heard it. A sound coming from the hallway. A soft, dragging step. Then another. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. I held my breath, pressing myself back into the chair. The sound stopped right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Don't look. I squeezed my eyes shut. The air behind me felt heavy, cold, like something was leaning over the back of the chair. Another buzz. Too late. I don't remember much after that. I woke up at dawn on the floor of the living room, the lights back on, the cat curled up against my chest. The house was silent again, but in the middle of the floor was a wet footprint, bare, pointing toward me. I left that morning, didn't even bother feeding the cat. I called my coworker from the road, but she didn't answer. Later, when she finally returned my call, she sounded strange, distant, distracted. I asked her if anything weird had ever happened at the house. There was a pause. Then she said softly, "You saw it, didn't you?" She hung up before I could respond. It's been weeks now. I'm back in my apartment in town. But every night at 3 a.m., I wake up to the sound of slow, dragging steps in the hallway, and every morning there's a wet footprint by the bed. Story, the end. The night was still, almost unnaturally so, as if the air itself had stopped moving. I'd left my shift at a small 24-hour pharmacy on the edge of town, a quiet Midwestern place where nothing much happens. At least that's what people think. It was after 3 in the morning. The streets were empty, the sky overcast, and a weak drizzle misted the windshield of my old sedan as I pulled onto the road. Everything was dim. Even the streetlights seemed weaker, throwing more shadow than light. There was always something about that drive home that made me uneasy. It wasn't far, maybe 12 miles, but it cut through a patch of farmland, past a stretch of abandoned houses from the 1950s when a nearby factory had closed. Most nights it was just deer, the occasional raccoon, and endless darkness. But this night felt different. Wrong. The first thing I noticed was the figure. He stood on the shoulder just past the intersection where Main Street meets Route 24. Tall, thin, no coat, no hat, despite the drizzle. As my headlights swept across him, he didn't move or react at all. I couldn't make out his face. It was too pale, almost reflecting light back at me, but I thought maybe he was a hitchhiker. Still, something about him made my stomach twist. He stood too still, arms hanging at his sides like they didn't belong to him. I drove past, eyes on the road, telling myself not to look in the mirror. But of course I did. He was gone, not walking, not fading into the mist, just gone. I told myself it was nothing. People walk the roads all the time. Maybe he ducked behind a tree. But a mile later, as I passed the old barn at Carson's Field, I saw him again, this time standing just inside the open doorway. His head tilted slightly, like he was watching me. I nearly slammed on the brakes, but I forced myself to keep driving. My heart started hammering. This stretch of road had no turnoffs, no driveways, no other roads. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me on foot. My hands shook on the wheel as I flicked on the high beams. The drizzle had turned into fog now, thick enough that the beams illuminated only a white wall a few feet ahead. Then my radio cut out. It wasn't on to begin with. I never played it on late drives, but now the speakers hissed with static, a soft, whispery sound like paper tearing. I reached to turn the knob, but it spun uselessly. The static rose louder, almost like a voice behind the hiss. My name, Eli. I froze. My heart hammered so loud it felt like it was in my ears. I slammed the volume knob all the way down, but the static didn't change. Eli, the voice hissed again. You left me? I nearly drove off the road. No one called me Eli, except my older brother, And he died 4 years ago in a car accident on this very stretch of highway. My knuckles went white on the steering wheel. This isn't funny, I shouted at the empty car. The headlights flickered, just for a second. When they came back, the figure was standing in the middle of the road. I swerved violently, the tires screeching on wet asphalt, missing him by inches. The car fishtailed, but I fought to keep control, breath ragged. When I glanced in the rear view, he wasn't there. Just the endless white fog curling over the blacktop. I sped up, desperate to get off that road, but the fog thickened until I could barely see 10 feet ahead. That's when the smell hit me. Rot. Wet and heavy, like a dead animal under the floorboards. It filled the car, though the vents were closed. I gagged, fumbling for the window button, but it wouldn't respond. My dashboard lights flickered, then went black. The engine kept running, but everything else died. Headlights, radio, dashboard, gone. Just the low rumble of the engine and the hiss of tires on damp road. And through the fog ahead, faint orange lights appeared. 2 of them, side by side. Headlights? No, they were too dim, too steady. As I drew closer, I saw it was an old truck parked diagonally across the road. Rusted, battered, its grille twisted like it had been in a wreck. Its cab was dark, no driver. I slowed, thinking maybe it had broken down, but every instinct screamed at me not to stop. Then I saw the figure again, standing by the truck, facing me. Same pale face, same stillness. Only now his head was tilted at an impossible angle, nearly resting on his shoulder. Something about the way he stood made me think he wasn't waiting for a ride. He was waiting for me. I floored it. My car roared past the truck, and for a moment everything went black. No road, no lights, no fog. Just blackness, like being underwater. When my headlights flickered back on, I was miles down the road. My dashboard lights came back. The smell was gone. My radio was off. I didn't breathe until I pulled into my driveway. My porch light burned warm and steady, but I stayed in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. When I finally stepped out, the cool air hit me, and that's when I saw the claw marks. 3 deep gouges raked across my back bumper, cutting through the paint into the metal, like someone had dragged a rake with knives across it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pale face, heard the static, smelled the rot. I tried telling myself it was stress, fatigue, some weird coincidence, but then the calls started. Unknown number. Always the same rasping voice. Eli, you left me. I changed my number. The calls continued. A week later, a coworker from the pharmacy told me about an article she'd read. Decades ago, a truck driver had crashed on that road, pinned in his cab as it burned. Locals said his ghost wandered the highway at night, flagging down cars for help. But if you stopped, you'd never be seen again. If you didn't, he'd follow you home. I've driven that stretch only once since. Daytime, bright sun, still I swear I saw him, just beyond the tree line. Watching. Patient. I don't drive at night anymore, but sometimes when the air is heavy and the crickets go silent, I hear it. The faint hiss of static in the walls, the smell of rot creeping in through the vents, and my name whispered from nowhere. I know it's still out there, waiting, watching. Story, the end.